Secretary of State Marco Rubio blew the lid off of a 50-year-old conspiracy. He said that the destruction of the American economy was deliberate.
Deindustrialization was not inevitable. It was a conscious policy choice, a decades-long economic undertaking that stripped our nations of their wealth, of their productive capacity, and of their independence.
He's right. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't market forces. It was a plan written down 50 years ago, and today we're going to give you the receipts. Now, you've seen the reports about the U.S.-European face-off at Munich, how the globalists marched a lineup of failing European leaders and American has-beens and wannabes onto the stage to challenge President Trump. But even the pro-MAGA coverage of Marco Rubio's powerful speech missed the bombshell that the deindustrialization was deliberate. Now, we didn't miss it because we were there in 1977 when the Council on Foreign Relations announced their plan to do it, when they called for, quote, the controlled disintegration of the world economy, unquote. I'm Susan Kokinda, and I was part of the team that exposed that report 50 years ago. So when I heard these words come out of Marco Rubio's mouth, I knew that what we were seeing is the most significant challenge to British imperial policy in modern American history. Now, if this is a fight you want to follow, please hit those like, share, and subscribe buttons so we can stay in touch and we can expand our reach. Here's what I'm going to cover today. First, what Rubio actually said and the panicked reaction from the Europeans who were at the same conference. Second, the 1977 CFR report that laid out the deliberate destruction of sovereign economies, precisely the destruction that Marco Rubio talked about. And third, how Trumponomics is reviving real economic sovereignty. So let's start with what Secretary of State Rubio laid out at Munich.
In this delusion, we embraced a dogmatic vision of free and unfettered trade, even as some nations protected their economies and subsidized their companies to systematically undercut ours, shuttering our plants, resulting in large parts of our societies being deindustrialized, shipping millions of working and middle-class jobs overseas, and handing control of our critical supply chains to both adversaries and rivals. Deindustrialization was not inevitable. It was a conscious policy choice, a decades-long economic undertaking that stripped our nations of their wealth, of their productive capacity, and of their independence. It was a foolish but voluntary transformation of our economy that left us dependent on others for our needs and dangerously vulnerable to crisis.
Let a few of those phrases sink in. A conscious policy choice, a voluntary transformation of our economy. Actually, it wasn't so voluntary, but I'll get to that in a minute. Now, here's what makes this speech so extraordinary. Rubio wasn't speaking into a vacuum. In her Saturday brief, Barbara reviewed the collection of warmongers and anti-Trumpers who filled that room in Munich. And she reported on the fact that the theme of the entire conference was, quote, under destruction. And it was a full-on attack of Trump's policies in specific and on the concept of national sovereignty in general. But lurking between the lines of the conference report and speeches is this reality. The globalists are no longer in control of the current world dynamic. The conference report says that economic uncertainty is nearly 3 times higher than it was during the 2008 financial crisis. Why? We don't have banks crashing like in 2008, at least not yet. That economic uncertainty comes from the fact that Donald Trump and his team have declared that the 50-year-old post-industrial model is over. Now, reflecting the recognition that the jig is up, European Central Bank head Christine Lagarde titled her speech, Preparing for Geoeconomic Fragmentation. And in it, she warned that a more assertive industrial policy is causing a rise in geopolitical tension and more frequent financial market stress. Now, translated, that means we have to now live in a world that is being reshaped by an assertive American industrial policy, and we who represent the global financier elite are no longer controlling the table. Lagarde signaled that new reality when she warned about the fragility of the European financial system. She said, we must avoid a situation where that stress triggers fire sales of euro-denominated securities in global funding markets, which could hamper the transmission of our monetary policy. Fire sales of euro-denominated securities. Is somebody getting a little nervous? Then she said that the European Central Bank will be expanding its repo facility to bail out bad euro-denominated securities. Why? Because for decades, the Federal Reserve had backstopped European financial markets. That's over, and the U.S. is no longer the lender of last resort for the gambling casino run by the City of London. Now, here's a good reason for you to subscribe to Promethean Action's free newsletter. We've been documenting statements by Treasury Secretary Bessent and the new Fed chair nominee Kevin Warsh, where they've made clear that America's new economic priorities are the physical economy and household incomes, not saving the financial bacon of the international banks. So head on over to our website. The link is in the description. But the fragility of European financial markets is just part of the picture. The real story is that Europe is destroying itself physically. A few days before Munich, the Prime Minister of Belgium delivered a stark message to the European Industry Summit in Antwerp.
Over the past 4 years, announced closures in the European chemical industry increased sixfold, representing a loss of almost 10% of the European chemical production capacity. In countries like ours, Germany, the Netherlands and France, the situation is simply dramatic. We are at the brink of an existential crisis.
Now, where does that existential crisis that he references come from? Here's the killer punch.
The decarbonization of Europe will become synonymous with its deindustrialization and eventually with its poverty and its irrelevance.
There's that word again, deindustrialization. The Belgian Prime Minister is saying the same thing that Marco Rubio said at Munich and that Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said at Davos. The globalist system of free trade and green insanity is a failure, and it has gutted the industrial base of the nations that succumb to it. Now, Rubio called it a conscious policy choice. That's the polite version. In 1977, the Council on Foreign Relations spelled it out in much blunter terms. They called it controlled disintegration. And when you hear what they wrote, you'll understand that everything happening in Europe right now and what was happening in the United States was the intended outcome. Now, before we get into the 1977 report itself, let me give you a little historical refresher, especially for those of you who might be new to this channel. After the assassination of William McKinley, the last American system president at the turn of the 20th century, the British Empire launched a project to return the United States to the imperial fold. Part of that project was the founding of the CFR in 1922 as the American arm of the British Round Table. But despite decades of subversion, the United States hung on to some semblance of economic sovereignty and industrial development until the 1970s. That's when the CFR launched their 1980s project, which produced a series of blueprints for destroying modern industrial society. One of them was entitled Alternatives to Monetary Disorder, and it let it all hang out. Here's what it said. A degree of controlled disintegration in the world economy is a legitimate objective for the 1980s, and may be the most realistic one for a moderate international economic order. Let that sink in. Controlled disintegration, a legitimate objective to achieve their moderate international economic order. Now, when you hear the words moderate international economic order, translate that into the current terms of rules-based order and liberal free trade system, which the Davos and the Munich crowd are trying to save. And the CFR knew exactly what tradition they were dismantling. They cited Alexander Hamilton by name. Here's how the CFR described the ideas which oppose their system. They were eloquently addressed by Hamilton in his Report on Manufactures of 1790, in which he expressed the opposition of American nationalists to their country's assuming the role of a raw materials exporter to Britain. Nationalists feared and opposed two aspects of this role: the tying of American economic development to the British economy and the growing dependence on Britain for goods vital to national defense. Let that sink in. The British Empire has always known that its mortal enemy is the American system, and back in 1977, they called for the controlled disintegration of the world economy to stop it. Now, the mainstream will tell you this is a conspiracy theory, But here it is in black and white, and it's what you have been living through for the last 50 years. And that is what Secretary of State Rubio called out at Munich when he said deindustrialization was a conscious decision. It's why we lost manufacturing in our middle and our working class, and we hollowed out our economy and our society. Europe is still doing it, but the Trump administration has rejected those policies. And by the way, that's why most of us voted for him. So, what do these new policies look like in practice? Has President Trump just cobbled together a series of ad hoc policies to try to staunch the economic bleeding? Or do we actually have an administration which knows what the real fight is? Well, look at Trade Ambassador Greer's speech at Davos, entitled The Hamiltonian Economic System That Too Many Have Forgotten. This is the first time since the CFR declared war on the Hamiltonian system that a high-ranking administration official has defended it. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent summarized administration policy with this statement: economic security is national security. A country does not have sovereignty if we don't have control of our critical minerals, our steel production, and our industrial base. In other words, the end of controlled disintegration. And everything this administration is doing, from tariffs to government support for critical sectors of the economy to bringing $17 trillion in investment into the United States, is the American system in action. Now, here is a remarkable example of how this works. Yesterday, Energy Secretary Chris Wright spoke at a press conference with officials from Valar Atomics.
One of President Trump's boldest proclamations was that this is America. We can build things, we can innovate, we can do things in this country. And in fact, he set out a very bold goal. This is just 12 months ago. He said by the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence, meaning July 4 of this year, we're going to have multiple nuclear reactors critical. People thought that was crazy. 15 months away. We built 2 reactors in 40 or 50 years, yet we're going to have 3 reactors critical by July 4. Today is history. A multi-megawatt next-generation nuclear power plant is loaded in the C-17 behind us. We're going to fly it to Utah today, and it will be critical, running all of its nuclear systems by July 4 of this year.
This is amazing, what they've done in a short few months. This is the American system, the partnership of the federal government and private industry to get the job done. And it's not just industry. This administration is going directly after the financial oligarchy, which profited from 50 years of controlled disintegration. This week, White House advisor Peter Navarro went on national television and called Jamie Dimon, the CEO of the biggest bank, JP Morgan in America, an SOB.
Jamie, I'm talking to you right now. Yeah. You, SOB, are the biggest beneficiary of interest rates on credit cards that are up to 30%. You, Jamie, the company you own is the biggest beneficiary. So you come out and act like, oh, you're acting in the public interest, and people don't look behind the hood. That guy is a usurious thief that's hurting the American people. He should shut up until those things come down. We don't need his advice.
Now, what's the issue? The Trump administration is demanding the banks lower interest rates on credit cards from the 20 to 30% range where they are down to 10%. Jamie Dimon's response? It would be an economic disaster. Did you catch that? He's admitting the entire consumer credit system depends on gouging you. That's the financial model that the CFR's controlled disintegration was designed to protect. And now the White House is telling them it's over. Trump isn't just talking about reversing deindustrialization. He's doing it on every front: trade policy, industrial policy, massive flows of investment into critical sectors, both public and private. This is the most comprehensive challenge to the post-1977 controlled disintegration in modern American history. And Marco Rubio's speech at Munich made that clear. This administration knows that deindustrialization was a conscious policy. And now we are embarked on the opposite: reindustrialization, and with it, a society that actually works. The Munich conference was not just a confrontation between the Americans and the Europeans. It was a confrontation between two systems: The imperial system of deliberate controlled disintegration laid out in 1977 and the American system of economic development. Europe is still clinging to the former, although there's some pushback from countries like Belgium. The Trump administration has consciously chosen the American system and is inviting other nations to join in this rebirth of the fundamental values of Western civilization. This is working. The American system is being restored. But the architects of controlled disintegration aren't going to give up. They're banking on the midterm elections less than 9 months away to stop it. That's why what we do at Promethean Action matters. We make sure that Americans understand the real terms of this fight, not left versus right, but sovereignty versus empire. And if you want to be part of that fight, go to our website and support us with a membership